Greetings all, and welcome to the first part of the 20th episode of the V.T.P, or the Veteran Trainer's Perspective. Today, we are going to be taking a bit of an odd trip through the language barriers that can sometimes form in the creation of names for Pokemon. In short, we're going to start taking a look at the original Japanese names for Pokemon and some of the unique meanings that can come from them. Prior to Generation 6, it was the custom that Japanese games for Pokemon always came first and served as the defining trait of their identity before they could be changed in translation. While many languages have their own unique translations to them that can give Pokemon their own unique status among said languages, I feel that the real essence of what these creatures are supposed to represent, more often than not, falls to the original Japanese names they are given as they are developed. While going through an extensive analysis of each and every Pokemon name in every language would be exhaustive, for all intentions, the one that matters the most is indeed the language that is used to develop them right off the bat. As such, we are going to take the time here then to look at the unique original Japanese names for some Pokemon and show how breaking them down can help reveal unique secrets and references regarding them that may have otherwise been lost in translation. We can start right off with the beginning of it all with the Bulbasaur family, and Bulbasaur in particular. The creature's Japanese name breaks down into seed, strange, mysterious, and possibly the phrase, "Isn't it?" This is actually a clever nod back to the earliest days of the Pokemon series, when it was uncertain whether to classify Bulbasaur and its evolutions as plants or animals because of the unique physiology. Today, we clearly know that they are best classified as animals, just with parasitic plants attached to them and integrated into their bodies. But it's still nice to see that this early mystery was given attention with their namesake. The members of the Spearow family might not seem to be likely to have unique names that speak to something deeper in them, but it turns out their names do have extra meaning when in the context of their Generation 1 counterpart, the Pidgey family. It is noted in many entries that Pidgey in particular are rather docile and easy to raise. Spearow and Pharaoh, on the other hand, have the Japanese word for demon in their names, which I think is a throwback to the more aggressive tendencies and comparatively docile counterparts in Pidgey, showing them to be much harder to work with and more dangerous to confront. The members of the Igglybuff family have fairly complex Japanese names with a load of potential meanings, from references to their size, balloon-like forms, and the huffy attitude among other things. But what really makes them unique is that they are at least partially named after food, with Igglybuff and Jigglypuff having references to cream caramel in their names, and pudding in the case of Wigglytuff. This may likely be an odd reference to their soft bodies, and while it might feel a bit weird and nonsensical, I personally think it fits these critters well, and gives them an adorable namesake that goes well with their already adorable appearances. With a lot of Pokemon, it isn't uncommon to see the names originate from an onomatopoeia of some sort in a given language, and for the most part, these are self-explanatory and make sense given their biology. However, I think that Zubat stands out because of their Japanese name is derived from the sound of an edged tool forcefully piercing something. It isn't made clear initially as to the significance of this sound, but to me, this is likely a direct reference to them as vampire bats, the sound representing the sound of them biting into something with their fangs. Arcanine might appear to be all about power and fire to the untrained eye, but its Japanese name is a bit more awkward in its form, and it may not initially appear to make sense at all. Simply put, the Japanese name for Arcanine directly translates to wind or windy. For a fire-type Pokemon, this may not make a lot of sense, but it is quite likely that the name is a reference to the fast-footed nature of these creatures, being able to run like the wind. This was given great support in Generation 2, where extreme speed served as a signature move for the beasts, helping to illustrate the purpose of the name even with Arcanine's own natural moveset. The members of the Poliwag family have an unusual addition to their Japanese names that adds on the Japanese term for the sound of slithering. Given that these creatures generally prefer the water over land, I think it is safe to assume that this slithering notion is a reference to the thick, slimy mucus that covers their bodies in order to keep them hydrated, the slithering motion linked to their slimy bodies moving across solid ground. As the original classic Psychic-type family of the first generation of Pokemon, it is rather interesting to see that the Japanese names for every member of the Abra family are derived from the actual names of famous psychics, mystics, and magicians. Abra is named after Edgar Cayce, a famous American clairvoyant that lived in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Kadabra is named after Uri Geller, a psychic well known for his spoon-bending powers, and a thorn in the sides of many fans until the recent drop of his long-standing lawsuit of sorts to allow the full use of Kadabra in all forms of Pokemon media. And Alakazam is named after Harry Houdini, one of the greatest magicians to ever walk the earth. Farfetch'd is a creature whose name origins are both well-known and quite unique, but that doesn't mean that they can't be included here for reference. Well, on the one hand, the Japanese name for Farfetch'd likely contains the Japanese words for wild duck and spring onion. It also has an abbreviation of the phrase, "a duck comes bearing green onions." This odd phrase essentially refers to something happening that is surprising, but also convenient, which itself is a likely reference to how, in the original Generation 1 games of Red, Blue, and Green, you could trade a weak Spearow for a much stronger Farfetch'd in Vermilion City, and cannot get one any other way. Though the joke is eventually on you, as Spearow are much more powerful and useful than Farfetch'd for those willing to be patient. Doduo and Dodrio are interesting creatures in their design, existing as a mashup of different bird types in their form, like ostriches, emus, moa, kiwis, and even cassowaries. But what makes them interesting is that their Japanese names are specifically designed to reference the flightless dodo bird. This does make some sense from the perspective that the dodo were indeed flightless, but at the same time, there are quite a few other flightless birds that would seem to be a better fit, like the kinds that Doduo and Dodrio's designs are based around. The name is a bit awkward from my perspective, but at the same time, it at least works well for them, and it's a nice nod to a bird that sadly is no longer with us. Both of Gengar's pre-evolved forms, Gastly and Haunter, have the Japanese names taken directly from the English word ghost, but Gengar is a bit different, as its Japanese name works as a translation for the word doppelganger. While nothing extremely odd for them, it is a nice nod to their established lore, as these creatures enjoy pretending to be and hiding within the shadows of others, allowing them to blend in with their surroundings and follow unsuspecting victims before they leap out and both scare their prey and sap the life energy to sustain themselves, a creepy feature that is only made worse by their other ghostly tendencies. Exegcute's Japanese name is another throwback to the likes of the Bulbasaur family, in that their name comes from the Japanese words for unexpected and egg. This is another clever Generation 1 nod to the fact that they do indeed look like eggs at first glance, but were found to actually be more akin to plant seeds, making this identity an unexpected discovery that helps to explain the unique physiology of both themselves and their evolution, Exeggutor. It is well established at this point that Hitmonlee and Hitmonchan in English are named after the famous Bruce Lee and Jackie Chan, but the Japanese names also reference famous fighters, though not ones that everyone is aware of. Hitmonlee's Japanese name, for instance, is a reference to Tadashi Saramura, a famous Japanese kickboxer who first popularized the sport, while Hitmonchan's original name is a reference to Hiroyuki Ebihara, a famous flyweight professional boxer from Tokyo, showing that these two creatures have been named in reverence to famous professional fighters from the get-go. While the other evolved members of its family reference a famous martial artist of some sort, Hitmontop are notably distinct from their evolutionary counterparts in that they are not named after a specific person, but a specific type of martial arts. Specifically, Hitmontop's Japanese name is a direct reference to the art of capoeira, a type of Brazilian martial art that combines elements of dance, acrobatics, and music to make for a dazzling show of technique and skill, which not coincidentally is the sort of fighting style that would perfectly fit the combat capabilities of these creatures based on even the moves they learn naturally on their own. The members of the Koffing family have names that are both self-explanatory and a bit odd. While both the Japanese names for Koffing and Wheezing likely contain the words for bad, poison, and gas, Wheezing has another add-on with the word again. While this might be seen perhaps as just a cheap way to say that same thing literally again for its pre-evolved form, I actually believe that this is a reference to the fact that Wheezing can be formed from the merging of two or more Koffing. Hence, the word again references that those that encounter them are facing another source of poison gas from the initial singular entity, ergo, two Koffing and thus Koffing again. Chansey and its pre-evolution Happiny have fairly simple names, especially in the case of Chansey, and it's not entirely clear what they are meant to really mean offhand. In Japanese, Chansey's name simply means lucky, while for Happiny it's a combination of the word pink and the Japanese term for good fortune. While Happiny's name is likely a play off of Chansey's own name, Chansey's name has unclear origins, though it may have to do with their rarity and the difficulty associated with capturing one. Whatever the reason, it's one that had clear purpose behind it, as Lucky was also the name for Chansey in the beta for Pokemon Red and Blue. The members of the Horsea family are a bit curious in that it is clear that Horsea and its first evolution Seadra were supposed to be dragons, but are not due to a genetic quirk, only truly becoming so when they evolve into Kingdra. However, in Generation 1, there was only those two, and thus Seadra was seen as a sort of dragon despite not sharing the right type assignment to be one. This is then reflected in their pre-evolved form, Horsea, whose Japanese name is taken from the Japanese phrase, illegitimate child of a dragon, showing that they are not a true child of a dragon as they are, because they lack the draconic features of their later evolutions. The Magby family is an odd bunch when it comes to their original naming conventions, as it seems to suggest a possible, definite answer for what they are biologically. While the words baby and burn fit across their names, what is more intriguing is that their Japanese names are also seen to be drawn from booby, which is a type of bird. This is a somewhat funny reference, as it is never made entirely clear what these creatures are biologically, so in a weird sense their original Japanese name seems to indicate that they are birds. Though whether they are as unintelligent as booby birds are historically referenced as being, is up to debate. Tauros is an interesting case, where its Japanese name is not a direct reflection of a Japanese word or phrase, but is instead derived from a different language altogether and simply used to fill in for something else. In this case, the Japanese name for Tauros is derived from the Greek word for centaur. It's uncertain why this name was chosen, as centaurs are part horse and not bull, but it is possible that this might be a reference to their more intelligent nature compared to traditional bulls. Otherwise though, this choice of name is a bit of an unclear mystery. Lapras is yet another type of Pokemon that is actually named after a real person, though his identity might not be commonly known among public circles. While it is possible that Lapras' Japanese name is a reference to the French term for seat, referencing Lapras' use as transporters by humans, more directly, it is also likely a reference to Pierre-Simon Laplace, a famous mathematician known to have written several books on the mathematical properties of the sea and tides, perfectly reflecting on the waterborne nature of Lapras. Flareon's name is quite simple in its form, but that doesn't make it any less odd for its lack of description. In short, Flareon's name in Japanese is a direct translation of the word booster. Without anything much else to go off of, it is quite possible that this might be a direct reference to an actual booster, a combustion device used to propel rockets, which, given its fire-type attributes, makes at least some sense. This could probably just be chalked up to being a product of the first generation, as this sort of one-word naming scheme is noted among several other species from the very beginning of the series. While the pre-evolved forms have names that are relatively easy to understand, Typhlosion's name is a bit harder to decipher meaning from without a bit of help to make sense of it all. The Japanese name for Typhlosion contains the Japanese words for blast as well as the word typhoon. The former is likely a reference to the fact that Typhlosion can rub their skin and fur together in order to create fiery explosions, so that makes perfect sense. The other end is a bit harder to understand, but given that a typhoon is the same as a hurricane, just in a different specific location, it is possible that this is an indirect reference to the heat shimmer that their bodies can give off when ignited, as warm water temperatures are needed for typhoons to form in the first place. Ariados is named after a figure of ancient mythology, though the connection might not be apparent without understanding the full tale. Ariados' Japanese name is the same as that in English, containing references to the Spanish word for two, possibly referencing the pair of false legs they have on their body, as well as Ariadne from Greek mythology. The connection here is that Ariadne assisted Theseus in his tale by providing a ball of twine that he could use to find his way out of the labyrinth that housed the Minotaur. While this might just be a reference to the capacity to generate and spin silk, I also believe it is a clever nod to the fact that Ariados can use silk to tag unknowing prey items, following the silk that they leave behind as they move in order to make a handy meal out of them and any friends that may be present in their vicinity, making for a gruesome and fairly methodical reference. The members of the Natu family are unique in that their names, though different, seem to both be derived from the same word, as both of them look to come from the Japanese word for native. This might not make a lot of sense at first glance, but it is quite possible that this is a reference to Native Americans, and more specifically here, Native Mesoamericans, as these creatures are noted for the connection to South America and Mesoamerican civilizations in both appearances and lore, offering a clever nod to the origins and thought that went behind the overall design. Alongside Flareon, another evolution, Umbreon, has some unique attributes to its name that in their case might not be readily apparent to those not familiar with Japanese lore. The Japanese name for Umbreon is derived from the words for black and lucky. This might not make much sense at first, but the truth behind it is that, in Japan, black cats are actually considered to be lucky, unlike how they are interpreted in other cultures. As such, their cat-like forms harken to the thought that they are actually lucky creatures to have around, their black fur color standing out compared to the other members of the Eevee family. Wynaut and Wobbuffet have always been a curious pair, and the name origins speak to two separate references that work well together. Wynaut's Japanese name is a direct reference to the word or phrase, "Really?" or "Is that so?", which might not make much sense on its own, until you include its evolution, as Wobbuffet's Japanese name is a reference to the phrase, "That's the way it is." Not only do the combination of these names form a potential perpetual conversation that can go on for a long time, as is likely with these creatures in a fight since they cannot attack directly, but in the case of Wobbuffet, it is also likely a reference to the Japanese comedian Hayashiwa Senpai I, who used Wobbuffet's namesake as a classic line in all of his performances. Shuko's Japanese name is a bit of a misnomer in truth, and has a lot to say about the general design of the creature than it does its actual biology. Shuko's Japanese name is a combination of the Japanese words for jar and barnacle. While the jar portion is easily understood, as the bodies are basically storage vessels that it can use to store and ferment berries in, the inclusion of the word for barnacle is a bit more difficult to understand, as these creatures are not barnacles, but endoliths. It is quite possible then that this name might be a reference to the hard outer shell they live in and the numerous ports inside of it, sort of like the main port that barnacles use to extend their softer bodies out of into the water. While the Japanese name for Remoraid makes sense when broken down, its evolution Octillery is a bit more of a mystery by comparison. While Remoraid references a gun in its original name, Octillery can be broken down into the Japanese words for octopus and tank. The latter might not seem all that applicable, but in truth it is a reference to the original beta design of Octillery. As can be seen here, they had a much more tank-like design in their original form, much as how Remoraid had a more gun-like body shape originally. While the designs for both of them have changed Octillery enough that the reference is not completely recognizable, it is nice to see that the names remained as they were to make this reference clearer. The members of the Houndour family tend to get a bad reputation from their nasty attributes and potent fiery and dark-type powers, but it seems that things were taken one step further beyond that in the naming convention alone. In short, the Japanese name for Houndour translates directly as devil, while Houndour's Japanese name is a reference to both hell and gar, the latter of which is the Japanese word for spear, likely referencing the spear-like tip at the end of their tails. Though maybe not as odd or unique as some other species, the starkness of this naming convention really makes them out to be vicious creatures worth avoiding at all costs. While you may initially think that the original Japanese name for Stantler would at least make a passing reference to them as deer of some sort or a similar creature, but interestingly enough, their original name is actually derived from a device called a Shishio Doshi, which is a device that uses water and bamboo, among other materials, to create a distraction that frightens away deer, birds, and other creatures that would likely harm crops. I feel that this is likely a clever reference to Stantler's capacity to create illusions to drive away potential predators, the one trait that makes them stand out from similar types of Pokémon. While the Japanese name for Gardevoir is self-explanatory for the most part, Ralts and Kirlia are a bit more unique in the naming scheme and attest to the abnormal powers they have access to at a young age. On the one hand, the name for Ralts, which is the same both in Japanese and English, is most likely an anagram for the word astral, hinting towards their celestial psychic powers. On the flip side, Kirlia's name, which is also the same in both languages, is a direct reference to Kirlian photography, a special method of photography that reveals coronal discharges around an object, something that is said to show the psychic power being given off by said objects. Even if the science on that particular note is a bit dubious in meaning, the name origins still work well for them in looking at their psychic powers. Both Ninjask and Shedinja have titles to them in the Japanese names that throw a clever twist reference in their forms with more meaning than some might think. First of all, the original Japanese name for Ninjask, not surprisingly, breaks down into the words ninja and the Japanese word for gunfire. While these insectoids are unable to actually fire any major projectile attacks naturally, this is most likely a reference to their incredible speed while moving in the air. Shedinja share the ninja part of the name, but the rest of it is a bit of a brain tickler. On the one hand, its name can be seen as a partial derivative of the Japanese word for casting off skin, but at the same time it serves as a pun that references the notion of a ninja that has abandoned their clan and lord. Both directly point at the fact that Shedinja exist independent of Ninjask and have been shed off and removed from the whole they once belonged to as Ninkata as they metamorphose into their adult form. The members of the Skitty family seem fairly cut and dry when it comes to the names, but there is an interesting nod to the name that many might not first expect. While part of their name is obviously derived from the Japanese word for cat, the other part of it is derived from the name of fox-tailed grass. This odd plant reference actually exists as part of the physiology, as the tails of Skitty and Delcatty resemble these plants in shape. The members of the Aron family are a bit of an oddity in that their names in Japanese are derived from several words, but the one that really stands out is the Japanese word for dragon. This is interesting because these creatures are not dragons at all, and for all intents and purposes, are likely more mammalian than reptilian. As such, I think that this is mainly more of a reference to their appearance and the sort of reptilian form they have on the outside. It was not uncommon for the term dragon to be used to describe a lot of strange creatures and phenomenon in more ancient times for both Japan and China, so it is quite possible that this might be a holdover of sorts from those times. Trapinch is the only member of its family whose Japanese name references something that doesn't directly connect to its biology, instead of being derived from the term nutcracker. It is quite possible that this may be a reference to their jaw shape and biting abilities. Furthermore, it may also be a bit of a play on the word knucker, which was a type of European dragon known for living in holes, much as Trapinch do as part of their life cycle. Corphish's original name is a strong link between their status as Pokémon and the regions they often occupy, in that it demonstrates that they should not be in most parts of the world where they now thrive. While the name does have in it the Japanese word for crayfish, at the same time it contains a section that can be interpreted as meaning a bad habit or to harm, or army or troops. This is actually a direct reference to the Pokédex entries in the debut generation, as it is made clear that the Corphish family are not normally native to the Hoenn region, but are in fact an invasive family that is becoming increasingly prevalent and overtaking aquatic ecosystems, much to the frustration of ecologists in the region. Latias and Latios are among only a select number of Pokémon species whose English and Japanese names are identical, and in this case, that is because the names are almost identical between the two creatures themselves, being derived from the Latin phrase to lie hidden, with feminine and masculine suffixes being given as needed to differentiate the two. This is likely not only a reference to the fact that these creatures can render themselves pretty much invisible easily, but are also known for roaming from place to place freely in both the games and the actual Pokémon world, keeping themselves hidden from public view as much as possible. Empoleon is a rare example, where both its English and Japanese names reference a specific human being, but even more so because both versions of its name actually reference the same person. Empoleon's Japanese name contains part of both the word Emperor and Bonaparte, the surname of the famous Napoleon Bonaparte of France and his descendants. The creature's English name references his first name along with this and the word Pole, so it's an interesting nod to show that Napoleon was essential to the initial naming convention of this particular type of Pokémon, likely connected to the country's powerful navy around that time. Lastly for now, while the pre-evolved form Bidoof might have a naming convention that makes ready sense, Bibarel's origins are a bit more awkward and require a bit more abstract thought to understand. The name is derived from two main Japanese words, the words for beaver and barrel. The former is easy enough to understand, but describing them as a barrel is a bit more unconventional. While it may refer to their thick barrel-like shape, I also believe that it could be a reference to their ability to store water like a barrel before unleashing it. Given that they do become partial water types after evolving, this at least makes some sense, especially given that they are the only normal types that have access to water type boost by type assignment alone. That's all the time we have to examine this topic today, but we are only halfway through the list of names I feel require the most examination. So stay tuned and keep your eyes peeled for the second part of this episode here on the V.T.P. Thank you all for watching this video. It is always a pleasure to help teach others about the world of Pokemon and the many facets of it that exist in both the world we call home and the world they call home. If you'd like, please leave a comment and subscribe and ring the bell to this channel to get regular updates on content and anything else that might be going on. You can find me and my written work on DeviantArt under the name Utitus and be informed of information and content uploads on my Twitter page and my Patreon page. Donations are always welcome. Always remember, the world of Pokemon is a vast and varied place, and there's no telling what secrets might be hiding just around the corner. So keep watch, stay vigilant, and always prepare for the unexpected. Until next time, have a wonderful rest of the day.